Hello, my name is Cassie Finley, and I wanted to welcome you to today's webinar on developing high performance through employee engagement. This is one of the skills taught in our 360 High Performance Leadership Mastermind groups. Our expert presenters today are David Williams, co-founder and vice president of Managers Resource Group, Scott Watson, president and CEO of Bridgepoint Leadership, and Chip Wilson, the founder and CEO of 360 Solutions. Our three speakers are high-performance entrepreneurs and have worked in the leadership training industry for over 60 years. Now, before we go any further, I'd love for each one of them to introduce themselves. Dave, we'll start with you and then go to Scott and then to Chip.
Thanks, Cassie. I'm David Williams. As Cassie mentioned, I'm with the Managers Resource Group. I've been had a 28-year career in the United States Air Force, and for the last 16 years I've worked in companies in the private sector, doing operations, sales, marketing, and manufacturing, and working in an executive management role. I have a bachelor's degree in management information systems and a master's degree from the University of Phoenix, an MBA. And my wife and I formed our company over the last year to really help companies and organizations perform to their highest potential. And it's something we're very passionate about, and very glad to be on this call today.
Thanks, David.
Hello,
Scott?
everybody. Oh, I'm sorry, Cassie, to interrupt you, but thank you. I'm Scott Watson, President CEO of Bridgepoint Leadership. Much like David, my background is also military. On the other side, though, I'm a 22-year veteran of the Navy. And then while being a veteran or on active duty in the Navy, I was teaching leadership and development for the last several years, traveling the country, teaching that, employee engagement, organizational transformation, and the likes. I have a real passion for it. Love what I'm doing, and I'm very honored to be taking part in this panel discussion.
Thanks, Scott. Chip, how about you?
Okay, hello everybody. My name is Chip Wilson. I am the founder of 360 Solutions. My background is primarily a handful of years right out of college, tried some entrepreneurial ventures, and then I went to work for a Fortune 500 company and figured out very early in life that I was psychologically unemployable, as I like to say. I loved being an entrepreneur, so in 1998 I founded 360 Solutions, and I've pretty much been involved with that now going into almost our 16th year now. We have hundreds of certified strategic partners in the United States and around the world. We have about 500 offices in the U.S., and we're in 33 different countries where we help certify high performers in helping organizations with the most valuable assets they have, which we believe is their human capital. So I'm excited about today's subject title.
Great. Thank you, Chip. Thanks for giving us some insight into 360. So just as you've heard, we've got some speakers today on the call that have an abundance of experience and background that will provide you some valuable insight into employee engagement. So without further delay, my first question, so what does employee engagement really mean to a business? I'd like to direct this to Dave Williams to provide an actual example of the impact employee engagement can have to a business.
Thanks, Cassie. And really, without getting into a purely academic or theoretical discussion, I just wanted to share a real-world situation that I was involved with that really revolved around employee engagement. I was asked by the president of an international aerospace distribution company to tackle some significant problem areas in their main company distribution warehouse operation. Several key results areas were not in standard. And to give you a background, kind of the environment, the main warehouse was the largest of 7 in the company, and there were warehouses around the world, 3 in the United States and 2 overseas. But the company had acquired another distribution company a few months earlier and had incurred a very large increase in inventory due to closures of 2 warehouses associated with the acquired company and the resultant transfer of inventory from those warehouses into the main corporate warehouse, as well as picking up new material from vendors that the acquired company had been dealing with. During this period of time, the company was growing very fast, and it was something that they were trying very hard to do everything they could to meet customer requirements, manage product, and so there were a lot of temporary employees that were hired during this period to help the operations staff keep their head above water. All of the workforce in this warehouse, except for one manager, were hourly employees. So the first thing I did is I looked at the key performance indicators that the president was concerned about. Specifically, customer complaints and returns were too high. On-time shipments to customers were unacceptably low. Both of these key results areas directly impact customer satisfaction and ultimately sales. Also, operating expenses for the warehouse were skyrocketing, and employee headcount was above budget, and there were some turnover problems. And kind of finally, the operations team was working 2 to 3 Saturdays each month just to keep caught up with orders that needed to ship to customers. So, looking at everything, kind of getting into a root cause analysis, there were several factors that were really driving this subpar performance. But one common theme was a low level of engagement by the employees and the operations staff. There were really 2 distinct groups of employees: the permanent employees with varying degrees of seniority, and the temporary employees, which comprised almost a third of the total operations workforce, but about half of the order fulfillment team. And this is significant because the temporary employees were held to the same performance standards as the permanent employees, but unlike the permanent employees, the temporary employees were not able to accrue sick time, vacation time, were not eligible for health and dental insurance, could not participate in tuition reimbursement and 401k programs. Additionally, there was an incentive bonus program that existed for the permanent employees that the temporary employees didn't participate in. If the temporary employees got sick and had to miss work, they didn't get paid for those hours. And again, they were held to the same standard as the permanent employees. So the temporary employees didn't feel a connection to the company. They knew their job was totally at the company's whim. They could be let go with no advance notice or reason. They received minimal training when they arrived and really didn't have an opportunity to attend all employee meetings where the company president would provide updates on where the company was headed and how the company was performing. These updates were pretty much on a quarterly basis. For the permanent employees, there was an incentive bonus program in place, but it was based on an individual quota system rather than a team performance. What this did is it led to kind of a cutthroat phenomenon with individual order fillers, where they would actually dig through a stack of orders and try to find the ones that they could fulfill quickly to get their individual numbers up without really any regard to what was happening as a team. And sometimes other team members needed help with a large, complex order. So, the lack of engagement by the employees to the company mission and this kind of self-serving motivation led to some time-sensitive critical orders not being shipped on time because the individual order fillers were focused on their own numbers rather than really what we needed to do for the customers. So for both the permanent and temporary employees, there was a general lack of understanding about the mission that the operation team was tasked with in relation to company objectives. They knew they had to ship parts to commercial aviation customers, but they didn't understand the consequences of not doing so on time and with 100% accuracy. And to kind of give you an indication, there's a term that's used in commercial aviation called AOG, and that means aircraft on ground. This refers to a commercial aircraft that has a scheduled flight, but it can't make that scheduled flight because there's something malfunctioning on the aircraft that needs to be replaced. An AOG condition is a big deal to an airline. If there's an aircraft that can't meet its scheduled takeoff time, it may be stranding 150 or more passengers who sometimes have to be put in a hotel room overnight, provided meals and other compensation by the airline, and then rebooked on another flight, and that, depending on the season, could take days. The point I'm trying to get at here is an AOG condition is very costly to an airline, and as a provider of materials to an airline, it is imperative that parts move in a very fast and efficient basis. I asked one of the production workers who'd been working on the line for a couple of years what AOG meant to him, and he said, well, I have to move faster. But he didn't really understand the consequence to the customer if that order didn't ship on time. He didn't understand the importance of the job that he had to do in fulfilling those AOG orders. So this was to give you an idea of kind of the environment and some of the things that we discovered as far as what was driving the subpar performance. So some of the things that I did to try to improve things. The first day that I was there working with the team was one of those overtime Saturdays, and I went out to the production floor to learn what was involved in fulfilling an order. Gave me an opportunity to see what was involved from a very granular, hands-on perspective in terms of fulfilling an order, but it also built credibility with the workforce that basically I wasn't afraid to roll up my sleeves, get my hands dirty, and work with the team to get the job done. As soon as I realized the problems with the lack of engagement from the temporary employees, I started working to convert those temporary positions to permanent. Now, that took some time because I had to work within budgetary constraints. But as those temporary employees were then offered permanent positions with benefits and with a future, you'd be amazed at how engaged those employees became and really how dedicated they became to helping the company reach its goals. We opened up a more robust communication process for the employees, starting with new hires on day one, so they better understood the company mission. Now, this was complicated somewhat by the fact that many of the employees spoke English as a second language. So we had to take time to make sure to fully explain terminology and to ensure that the message was understood by those employees so they really understood the mission that we had and what they were being asked to do. And then we even had one employee that was hearing impaired, so we had to make sure that there was a sign language interpreter available as well. We scheduled all employee meetings for the operations team in addition to the ones the entire company had. Sometimes we do that in association with a cookout or a seasonal luncheon like a Thanksgiving luncheon. And we invited the company president and vice president of supply chain to brief the employees on how the company was doing and how their contribution was helping the company be successful. We changed the individual performance incentive bonus system to be more of a team-based bonus where basically we all win or we all lose. Very much like a football team. You know, it's something that was really important to establish the team goals, to post and brief the KPIs so that the employees knew how they were doing in relation to the goals and how they were exceeding the goals in a lot of cases. For the operations folks, there wasn't any clear path for progression. Intra-company transfers were not necessarily something that the operations team saw as a possibility. So as positions opened in other departments of the company, I worked with the hiring managers in those positions to make them know not only that I was okay with people from the operations team applying for jobs, but to try to help them be selected for those positions based on their experience and what they contribute to the company. And then finally, worked with the subordinate managers to really empower them to work with their teams to solve problems and to deal with issues that came up as they presented themselves. So, looking at the what were the end results, in less than 8 months, we were able to get operating expenses reduced by $65,000 a month. We reduced headcount by 20%. Customer complaints were reduced by 67%. On-time shipment to customer request was improved by 30%, and all of those metrics were now within standard. And we even reduced the amount of Saturday work from 2 to 3 Saturdays a month to, at the most, 1 Saturday per quarter. So again, at the end of this 8-month period, we're quite literally doing more with less. Fewer people producing higher results and at lower costs. So, what are the takeaways from this? I am firmly convinced that engaged employees perform at a higher level. We need to identify the mission. The employees need to identify to the mission itself and accept that, take ownership in accomplishing the mission. We need to be able to communicate in terms that the employees understand. And they need to be able to be provided with meaningful feedback and a reward system that makes sense to them. We need to provide for a future, give them training opportunities and opportunities to progress. You know, again, it's something that the matter of reciprocity. You know, if you're going to ask people to perform at a high level, you need to be able to recognize it and reward it. So again, I think I've addressed some of the questions that you received, Cassie, in terms of you know, what we got from attendees of the webinar. But this is what I found in a real world situation. I just wanted to share some of the things that were successful in increasing employee engagement.
Thank you, David. You cover a lot of those details, and you are correct. We are getting some questions, and you've already addressed a number of those questions. I think it's very helpful for the audience to hear specific details with how employee engagement actually works on a day-to-day basis and how you use those metrics to your benefit. With that being said, I'd like to open this up and ask Scott, what experience have you had with the impact of employee engagement?
Thanks, Cassie. I'm going to take this from the other side and go back about 20 years in my career and give you the perspective from what I'll call the end user. I was that guy at one time who was working long hours, weekends, and didn't have a clear message as to why I was doing it. So we were overseas. I'm an aviator by trade, and we were flying and flying a lot. We were flying weekends, days, nights, middle of the night, or early morning. You name it, we flew. And all I knew at the time as a young sailor was you just kept your mouth shut and you did what they asked you to do. But also as a young sailor, you know, my morale was starting to suffer because I was missing out on some of the things that younger people enjoy at that time. The nightlife, other things like that. So, and I wasn't the only one. As a group, as a whole unit, we were suffering because we were getting dogged pretty hard, and we didn't know why. And Dave had talked about it with his recommendation there, and it's just like when the president of the company came in and talked. All it took was a simple message from the leadership on down as to why we were doing this. Turns out we had to get all of our required flight hours taken care of because we were going to be sitting on an alert status of a pending operation going down, and we were the search and rescue aircraft that was going to go out and look for downed pilots in the mission. We didn't know that. All it took simply was some communication about how important everybody was, down from the lowest level lineman that was launching and recovering the airplanes to the maintainers, to myself and everybody else, to realize, hey, this is a really, really, really important mission. Everybody, and it can't go without everybody being ready to go. And it just took simple engagement like that to make everybody, and then suddenly nobody cared that we were working 15 hours a day, 7 days a week. We wanted to do it. So I kind of wanted to address, and there's, from the other side, there's no measurables to that as far as, you know, quantitative wise, as far as revenue or anything, but what was a big takeaway from us was morale was incredibly improved, and people were working together. The team was working together, and the end product ended up being fantastic. So just want to give maybe that end user side of the house too, about how important some of the things that Dave talked about are to the situation.
No, I think that's a valuable insight, Scott, and it's great that we had David showing us from one perspective and you showing it from the other perspective, because employee engagement, as we're learning, both parties have to communicate clearly, set and manage expectations as you progress in the common goal or the common outcome of your business or your organization. If you don't mind, Scott, let me change gears here just a little bit, and I'd like to look at employee engagement from a different perspective. Could you tell me, please, how employee engagement looks in terms of leadership when you're having to deal with multiple generations in a workforce?
Yes, Cassie, absolutely. So here's a neat thing that's going on right now in our workforce. For the first time in the history, since they've been recording these statistics, we have 4 active generations in the workforce. There's a 5th generation that is approaching. They're still a couple years away, that the Generation Z. But right now, we currently have the veterans, and this group has 15 different names. I picked the top 4 that you'll find most often. It's the veterans, the GIs, the traditionalists, or the builders. And they're that generation that was born before 1946. I think Tom Brokaw calls them the greatest generation, obviously from what they went through, when they were younger. We also have the baby boomers, and we hear a lot about the baby boomers and how, so many of them now are getting older, and they'll be exiting the workforce here. Generation X, then the millennials, and then the millennials becoming the primary. They'll comprise the majority of the workforce by 2025. What makes this unique is every generation, in particular, we could probably group the veterans and the baby boomers probably in a group and call them the, for the lack of a better term, the older generation. And we can go X, Ys, and millennials and maybe call them the younger generation, just for the sake of of conversation. Now, I also want you to keep in mind, these are just generalizations. Just because we're talking about a generalization based upon veterans and baby boomers doesn't mean every person that falls into this age group has these type of characteristics. But in speaking with this seems to be the trends that'll help out when it comes to engagement when dealing with multiple generations. Some of the things that we're seeing that people see or tend to notice is that in the older generation, again, the veterans and the boomers, you tend to see people that are more formalized when it comes to work. For the lack of a better term, they believe in the chain of command. I referred you to, if anybody ever watched the show Mad Men on television, the older generation had secretaries. You walked in, you made an appointment with the secretary before you went into the office, and everything was very formal, from the way we dressed, the attire, and work was the main focus of their life. It wasn't uncommon for people to work in the same job for 40 years. Younger generation is a little bit different. More of a relaxed generation. Their communication style is different. We don't leave the house without our cell phones in our pockets because we're afraid we're going to miss a text or an update on Facebook. So our priorities have changed a little bit. And if we're working together, you can see how these different generations could possibly clash. So here's some recommendations that I've got for you. The first one is setting a clear ground rules regarding communication. As we just said, communication can be quite different between the two groups. The older generation tends to enjoy the face-to-face type meeting. They're not big on communication via email, okay? And as we've already discussed a little bit, and I'll say it again, the younger generation is more into the social media side, the informal, sending text back and forth, almost sometimes afraid, it seems like, to pick up the phone and actually hold a conversation. They would much rather just do it electronically. So what we recommend is having a clear set of ground rules regarding how we're going to communicate, and that can be done in many different formats, but definitely have a set of ground rules governing that. The next one we'll talk about is stressing that everyone become comfortable with all forms of communication. So we have these generalizations based upon the older generations, the younger generations. But what we should stress is the older generation, we should stress that they try and become comfortable with social media, with texting and the communicating like that. But also the younger generation should also, try and get comfortable with face-to-face meetings, maybe standing up doing facilitations, telepresence, such things like that. The next one we're going to talk about here is getting to know your people. And this is important because everybody's different. Like I said, these are generalizations based upon, generations, but they're not all inclusive. So the best way we get to know what communication style and what engagement style works for our employees is by getting to know them. Okay, individualize your approach. What works for employee A may not work for employee B. Okay, and so by getting to know them, we know the different styles, different forms of communication that can work there. So the next thing we're going to talk about is recognizing the difference in values between the generations. I think this one, I relate to. It never fails. I remember when I was a younger man, the older generation would constantly tell me that we were doomed to fail. We were going to be the downfall of this world, the country. They had no confidence in our generation because we were, we didn't concentrate on things the same way that the older generation did. We did things differently, and we were going to be the downfall. Well, they've been saying that probably since the beginning of time and the beginning of generations, and we're still doing pretty good. So, but we need to recognize the value, the differences in values. The older generation values the job. It is they put it before everything. They tend to give whatever is needed on the job. They're used to working for a company for 40 years. The younger generations, they're more interested in a work-life balance. Unfortunately, in today's world with layoffs and stuff like that, that's what this younger generation's used to. So they're always kind of on the lookout for a better job. They always have a resume on the ready. That didn't used to be that way 20, 30 years ago in the workforce. So the values are changing. And then I'm not saying either generation's values are the right and the others are the wrong. They're just different values. And if we understand the difference in values between the groups of people, it can sometimes help us understand where everybody's coming from. And then the next one we have is what motivates them. Once again, we're talking about, and I'm generalizing, again, put the vets and baby boomers together, and then the Generation X and the millennials together, but you got to find out what motivates everybody. And it tends to be that this older generation was motivated by the job and everything that comes with it. Insurance, 401k, benefits, all that kind of stuff. Well, the younger generation, once again, because they've been raised in a different time, those things kind of play a back seat to, they need more guidance. They're looking for feedback. They're looking for acknowledgement. And then we go back to the difference in opinion. Sometimes there's a perception from the older generation that the younger generation is needy. And that's not quite right. It's a misperception. It's not that they're needy. They just have different values and different things that motivate them. So, good leadership in these type of situations would be to realize the importance and acknowledgement that the younger generation needs. However, it's also important to let that younger generation know that they're not going to be spoon-fed the whole time. That they're not going to always be getting the guidance and acknowledgement that they need. So the next thing we're going to talk about here is, I got a couple more to go, and then we'll wrap it up, is finding common ground. And with this is, in that workforce is trying to find, so we have different generations, they have different values, they have different motivating factors. So let's find a common ground. We tend to stereotype, as I've been talking about that. And when we stereotype between generations, I think we always tend to stereotype and assume the absolute worst intentions. And that's not fair. So we assume that the worst intention of each generation, and then that can affect the work environment and our engagement. We always tend to think it's the other person's problem. They need to adapt to my style. I don't need to adapt to their style, and that's not going to work. So, try to find that common ground between the groups of people. Next, we're going to talk about is we tend to shy away from the unknown. What I'm talking about that is, I remember the days when our smartphones came out. In fact, if I could even relate to modern times, my parents and their utilization of a smartphone, sometimes they cannot wait till I'm with them so they can ask me 100 different questions about their iPhone that they don't understand. They're scared they're afraid they're going to hurt their phone by clicking on an app that has a red number 1 up in the corner of it, that they're going to press a button and the thing's going to self-destruct. They're afraid of what they don't know, so they're afraid to do that. So there's some ways to get around that. There's not to specifically address the older generation, but there's classes about social media. Tutorials online that you can take. You can take Excel classes, Word classes, Outlook. You can go to an Apple store and get free demonstrations about how your phone works, how your iPad works, how your Apple computer works. Microsoft does the exact same thing. There's avenues out there. So the stuff that people do not understand or don't know, they can educate themselves and understand it. Next, let's talk about sharing our knowledge. And this can be done via a number of different avenues, but it's important for each generation to share their knowledge of different things and things that they take that is more value to them with the other generation, and that helps get an understanding between the two. And so I'm kind of combining the last two here with sharing your knowledge and sharing your differences. If we're sharing what's going on between there and our knowledge and our differences, all groups are going to grow out of that, because we're going to understand the stereotypes that are associated that we have out there. We're going to get them out in the open. We're going to talk about them. We're basically going to find out what makes each other tick, and we'll have a better understanding, and that'll open up better lines of communication, better engagement. We can do some of these things it could be just something as simple as a social event, whether it's, so the holidays are approaching here, whether you have a holiday get-together or a luncheon or something like that, where we bring everybody together and it's not necessarily that work environment, it's the social environment. We get to talk to each other. We get to share stories, share knowledge, maybe, understand each other in a completely different light. And then I'm going to sum it up with some advice I got a couple years ago that I think about all the time, especially when it comes to leadership. And it was some of the best advice. I don't remember who told it to me, but I still remember the advice. And that is, like it says on the screen, it's up to us as leaders to adapt our leadership style to our employees. It's not our employees' responsibility to adapt to us. Meaning that, hey, as we get older and we're the outgoing generation, the new generation has different styles, and we need to adapt to that. And they're the future. So hopefully I addressed some of those questions, Cassie.
Yes, thank you so much, Scott. I love the insight. As I was thinking through your conversation, I tended to see the world from my generation. It's very insightful when you talk about employee engagement, look at the world from the different lenses, and especially in the workplace. And as we engage employees, there are a lot of variables that we need to think about. So very helpful. Thank you so much. So let's move to our third speaker, which is Chip Wilson. And I'd love to get your insight into employee engagement and, of course, the different variables that impact employee engagement from your years of experience in teaching and developing leaders.
Okay, well, I appreciate it. I'm going to, again, take a little different perspective, and I appreciate both of the prior speakers' angle on it. I'm going to give you a little bit of mine, dealing with employees myself for many, many years, and then also a lot of organizations that I've worked with over the years, not only in the States but overseas. There are common denominators that apply all the way across the board. Matter of fact, the Harvard Business Review recently just put out a new case study that I found interesting. They took over 200,000 employee engagement surveys of most of the Fortune 500 companies that would participate, and asked, how do you engage? how do you keep your employees engaged? And then they did it from the actual employee side. What keeps you engaged? And when you looked at all the common denominators, the baseline was this. As assuming that the employee felt that their compensation was adequate, okay, that they felt that the company paid them fairly, then everything else was emotional driven. Meaning employees quit bosses, they don't quit companies. With that being said, emotional intelligence and the way the company and the boss of the employee treats them is more important than anything else that the organization can do. And the relationship with their peers and the relationship with their boss had everything to do with engagement. So we looked at, so as this case study continued to unravel or look at things, what it really looked at is the 80-20 rule, meaning 20% of your employees produce 80% of the work. But yet that 80% of the employee base that was disengaged took up a lot of our effort. And we were trying to manage down to the common denominator to try and get all of these employees engaged, when the reality is, 20% did 80% of the work. And so they were looking at how do we keep those 20% that do the majority of the work, how do we engage them? And what they found was that we are all emotional beings first that justify engagement with logic second, not the other way around. And when companies approach engagement from a logical standpoint, the carrot or the stick concept, that it doesn't produce the results that they're looking for. So, Cassie, if you can move to that Wheel of Life model, this comes out of one of our basic emotional intelligence courses, and you'll see in the center there the true self. And in almost every survey, all the research that I've done over the years, when it comes to engaging employees, you need to understand who that employee is personally, individually, not collectively as a whole, as a part of a machine that's trying to produce a profit, but as an individual. And there's what we call 4 Ps, 4 major areas that we're looking for. One is each individual, just like a child in a family, they have a unique personality. So to engage one employee is different than engaging a different one based on their personality style. The second is their passions. And the more you as a direct manager, direct boss, or leader of a company can understand what that employee is passionate about and tie it directly to your key result areas and see if there's a connection there, the higher they are engaged. The third is principles. It's interesting, just because we as an organization set a mission, vision, value statement doesn't mean it ties directly or even remotely close to their principles. So again, that personal relationship, understanding what they're willing to negotiate over, but more importantly, what their non-negotiables are and what their principles are, has created a higher level of engagement. And then the last one is purpose. And I can tell you, if you can tie what that employee believes their purpose is at the organization to the big picture, you will find engagement skyrocket with that employee. Because as all of us on this webinar have probably heard the story of the past where the manager walks by and there's a bunch of bricklayers there, and the first bricklayer, he asks, "What are you doing?" And the guy says, "Well, I'm laying bricks." And he asks the second guy, "What are you doing?" He says, "Well, I'm laying bricks." And he asks the third guy, and he says, "I'm a part of a team that's building a cathedral." Well, if you can tie the passion of that employee to the big picture of the organization and get them to understand what they're doing, their engagement level, again, skyrockets. Now, on the Wheel of Life, kind of the outside, these are just 8 different areas that if you're a manager, if you're a boss, these are areas that you might want to spend some time talking to them about. What's going on with you personally and yourself and your partner? What's going on with your family? What's going on with your friends? What are you doing to invest in the community? How's your career going? How are you doing on your finances? Where your living environment, your house or your neighborhood, or those kind of things, and then their health and their recreation. And if you look at those aspects, one of the fast-growing trends in the HR world is, instead of having an annual performance review, where we sit down once a year and you know, give them feedback on how they're doing and give them a small raise, whatever it might be. We take these 8 areas and maybe we have a performance review almost every month. And we sit down and we say, you know, at the first of the year we set some goals for you personally and professionally, and I think every month we ought to have a sit down face-to-face, go to lunch, talk about where you're at on these areas, understand the personality of that individual, understand their passions, what their principles are, and what they feel their purpose is inside of the organization. And the more we individualize their personal development plans, the studies have proven their engagement level skyrockets. And as we know, engaged employees produce much higher results than average to low engaged employees. And so it's not a waste of time to take them to lunch, to sit down once a month and to talk, and to personalize that conversation. It might seem awkward in the beginning for some because they feel that employees are employees and we don't need to know all this stuff about their life. But the truth is that if you care about them and you learn these things about them, their engagement to you goes up, which means the overall engagement to the company goes up. And in this white paper research that HBR just put out, it showed that the longer an employee is with an organization, the more their engagement drops off. And a brand new employee is excited, they're engaged, they're enthusiastic about the work, and the longer they're there, the more tenure they have, the more their engagement goes down, the more they're disconnected, except for about 20%. There's that 80-20 rule. And those 20% stay engaged because of their relationship with their direct boss and their coworkers. And they are tied directly to the vision of the organization. So, you know, in terms of my research and Harvard Business Review and others' research, that personal connection is by far the best thing that you can do to raise the level of engagement.
Thanks, Chip. I think that's very insightful, and I like the 4 Ps because it's something I think that we can all remember and apply as leaders, as managers, as directors, even as coworkers, that we can learn at least to connect from an emotional standpoint to building relationships in regards to how people engage, when they engage, and how they engage. So we've gone on a journey from experiences that David and Scott have brought to the table to look at the different ways that we communicate and connect with engaging employees through the different generations, the insight, and now looking at the emotional intelligence aspect and looking at the 4 Ps. We've covered a lot of information, but we still have a number of questions that are being posed. So with your permission, I'd like to ask the first question. The first one says, what interventions do you suggest for government employees that you have inherited to keep them engaged while extending trust that they are doing everything they need to be doing in the best interest of the customer without micromanaging? I'm going to throw that out to the group.
Hey, Cassie, this is Scott. I'll take a stab at that one if I could, because I think it's kind of relative to the story I had shed light on after Dave had went. You know, government employees sometimes we just need to, you know, they need to know how they fit into the overall piece. You know, their importance in the overall process. They need to know and be acknowledged and sometimes reinforced that they are very vital in the process, that they're just not coming to punch the clock from 8 to 5, that everything they're doing is very, very important to the end product that the government needs. And for whatever reason, whatever part of the government they're in, whether it's local, municipal, you know, DOD, whatever, it plays a vital role in the world, and they just need to be reminded of that sometimes.
Yes, I agree. Any other insight on that one from Chip or David?
Well, I agree with Scott. You know, and again, it goes back to the emotional intelligence side of things. You know, they don't care how much you know unless, you know, they know how much you care about them. And so many times in a management on up role, we tend to share information that we think is important because it's based on logic, but we all know we're emotional beings first to justify decisions with logic or rationalize logic. We're not logical beings that, you know, have to deal with our emotions. And so if we can treat each and every individual as a emotional being first, understand their personality and how they take information, understand what their passions are and what drives them, and their principles and their purpose tied to the organization. I mean, you want to talk about firing people up, getting them to follow you. If you can tie into those things, it's regardless if it's a government employee or whether it's a, you know, for-profit, non-profit, it doesn't matter. It's tying into what drives that individual that raises engagement, not necessarily the function of the job that they're doing.
Okay, great. Another question I'd like to pose to the group is, how do you suggest a leader interview for character that will ultimately impact employee engagement?
Dave, you want to take this one? Did we lose him?
We might have lost Dave. Let me check our technology here. Chip, why don't you take that and we'll try to get involved.
I'll take it while you're checking there. You know, I hate to sound like a repetitive drum here, but the 4 Ps are part of the interviewing process that I use at my organization, and you know, I develop questions around those 4 things. For example, you know, I'll ask them around purpose. For example, you know, when you have worked at other organizations, you know, what was your purpose there? Not just function, job function, but how did it tie to you personally and your purpose of what you're trying to accomplish in your career and your goals? And then I would ask things about, you know, what are you passionate about? Regardless of work, what do you do when you're not at work? What drives you? You know, what are you passionate about? And get them talking about it and dig deeper. And that typically ties to their principles. It'll tie back to, you know, they're passionate about X, Y, or Z because it's something that they truly believe in, and it's their principles, and they typically it ties to what they feel their purpose is. And in that conversation, you're going to learn about their personality. And you can dig deeper into that personality side by asking them, you know, what are some of the biggest challenges you've faced and how'd you overcome them? And, you know, have you ever worked for somebody you just did not get along with? What happened? Why? What caused the conflict? How about coworkers? You know, and you're really trying to drive towards their personality, their passions, their principles, their purpose, because that will, you know, tell you a lot more about them than a resume. Resumes are nothing more than, you know, a script that they've created and they've practiced answering the questions to it. I take resumes and I set them to the side right away, and I spend all of my time talking about these 4 areas.
Yeah, I agree. I teach an entrepreneur class, and this is something we focus on too. As opposed to trying to match a skill set, it's really about matching these 4 Ps with the vision or the mission of the company. And then by virtue of that, you've got the engagement from the employee. We've got some time, so let me move to the next question. This question states, what is the process or steps of getting employees to own and embrace engagement? David, are you back on? Can you take this one?
Yeah, can you hear me, Cassie?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Sorry we lost you for a short period.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. I was trying to participate in the last one. Yeah, be glad to talk about this one. As far as getting employees to own and embrace engagement, again, it really kind of ties, you know, back to really everything else we've talked about. You really have to understand what is important to the employee, and then be able to clearly communicate what is expected in the job that you're asking them to do, and then how that ties to the mission, the overall mission. Communication sometimes is really a difficult challenge for a company. We kind of talk about communication, you know, in terms of being able to get the information of the employee in a context they can understand. But just like anything else, I mean, like in training that we provide, we used a spaced repetition type of learning, where we repeat things and try to ensure that what I've said today you retain tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And sometimes you have to do that in terms of making sure that people understand the mission that they have to perform and really how important their role is in accomplishing that mission. And sometimes, we have difficulty in consistency of message. It's something that I've seen before where a senior manager may say, you guys are doing a great job, company's doing great, we're bringing in all kinds of revenues, we're growing like crazy. And then the next communication the employee hears is, but you're not going to get a pay raise this year. And so, you build conflict because the employee ultimately, people are looking for the what's in it for me. I'm working, I'm busting my butt, I'm trying to do a good job, helping the company grow. But at some point, there's an expectation that something's going to come back to me other than a pat on the back. And sometimes that's all you get. But when the message is something that is more negative, like there's no merit increases this year, we're on a hiring freeze, those are the things that really conflict what the employee sees in terms of you want me to take responsibility for owning this part of the job and what we're trying to do for our customers or the end goal of the company, yet you're kind of turning a blind eye to what my needs are. So, I think our communications need to be clear, they need to be understood, they need to be repeated, and with consistent messaging that makes sense to the employee, so that when we're asking them to make sacrifices, put in extra effort, they can see that there's something at the end of that process that will ultimately benefit them or their families, whatever their situation is.
I agree, and I think even some of that information falls in line with some of the generational tips that Scott provided. Any insight from you, Scott, on this one?
It's funny. Dave said the exact term I was looking for. The acronym is WIFM, W-I-F-M. What's in it for me? And sometimes at the end of the day, and everybody has it, like Dave said and Chip said, they all have different things that motivate them, whether it's monetary, just being part of a team or whatever. But it's always finding what makes everybody tick. So what's in it for them? Whether it's bonuses or, hey, we're going to, not have bonuses this year, but we're going to redo the place and we're going to get new furniture because, at the end of the day, that may make us feel better by having new office furniture, whatever, better, comfortable environment. So I love the what's in it for me approach. So I echo what Dave said.
Thank you. Thank you. Chip, any closing statements before we top this off?
Yeah, I will make one more recommendation that I believe everybody should try, and this came from a large organization that I did an employee survey and training with, a large government contractor that had 100,000 employees. When we looked at the way they did their employee engagement surveys, it was an 18-page lengthy survey that employees were forced to go in and take so that they could calculate all this information. And what they found was that employees would go in and do 15 or 20 questions and then log out and come back later and do another 15 or 20 and log out and then come back in. Where if you're going to survey your employees, whether it's a small group or a very large group, do it in very short increments but more frequently, meaning ask 10 questions, but maybe ask 10 different questions 4 times a year, every quarter. Instead of saying, you know what, we haven't done it in 3 years, let's ask 60 questions and try and collect all the information at once. Small increments over a long period of time works a lot better.
Great insight for us to think about as we're assessing our organizations and working hard to engage our employees. I do want to thank each and every one of you for joining us today, and I hope that each of you picked up a little tidbit of information, a skill, an idea, a thought that you can use. I also want to take this opportunity to invite you to our next webinar, which will be on organizational transformation with speakers Tony Gay, Ray Marcantoni, and Chip Wilson. The webinar will be hosted on December the 17th at 2 o'clock Central Standard Time. And in this webinar, we'll discuss how leaders like yourself can actually identify the results you are achieving based on your environment, and how, by creating the right strategies and core processes, determine your culture, and with those skills, you can transform your organization to achieve the competitive advantage that you're seeking.